Yeah. Yes, here I am again alone. No, who cares? If I'm alone, so what is not? Who cares? Okay, chapter 2. Narrator. It will be hard to explain exactly what could have started the idea of that foolish dinner in Katrina Ivanovna's confused brain. Nearly 10 of the 20 rubles given by Raskolnikov for Marmeladov's funeral were wasted on it. Maybe Katrina Ivanovna felt forced to honor the memory of the dead man properly, so that all the renters, and even more, Amalia Ivanovna, might know that he was in no way lower than them, and maybe very much better than them, and that no one had the right to turn up their nose at him. Maybe the main reason was that strange poor person's pride, which forces many poor people to spend their last savings on some traditional social event, simply to do like other people and not to be looked down on. It's very likely too that Katrina Ivanovna wanted on this occasion at the moment when she seemed to be left alone by everyone to show those miserable, hateful renters that she knew how to do things and how to host guests, and that she had been brought up in a polite, she might almost say noble colonel's family, and had not been meant for sweeping floors and washing the children's rags at night. Even the poorest and most broken-hearted people are sometimes open to these sudden bursts of pride and vanity which take the form of an unstoppable nervous urge. And Katrina Ivanovna was not broken-hearted. She might have been crushed by hard times, but her spirit could not be broken. That is, she could not be frightened, and her will could not be crushed. Besides, Sonia had said with good reason that her mind was breaking down. She could not be called crazy. For a year past, she had been so worried and upset that her mind might well be overstrained. The final stages of lung disease are likely, doctors tell us, to affect the mind. There was no great choice of wine, nor was there expensive wine, but wine was there. There was vodka, rum, and cheap sweet wine. All of the worst quality, but in enough amounts. Besides the usual rice and honey, there were 3 or 4 meals, one of which was pancakes, all made in Amalia Ivanovna's kitchen. 2 water heaters were boiling, so that the tea and the warm drinks could be served after dinner. Katerina Ivanovna had herself taken care of buying the food with the help of one of the renters, an unlucky little Polish man who had somehow been stuck at Madame Fishwell's. He quickly placed himself at Katerina Ivanovna's service and had been running around as fast as his legs could carry him all that morning and all the day before. We were very eager that everyone should notice it. For every small thing he ran to Katerina Ivanovna, even looking for her at the market, and every second called her lady. She was completely sick of him before the end, though she had said at first that she could not have managed without this helpful and noble man. It was one of Katerina Ivanovna's traits to describe everyone she met in the most glowing ways. praise was so over the top that it was sometimes embarrassing. She would make up various stories to make her new friends look good and truly believe they were real. Then all of a sudden, she would be disappointed and would rudely and meanly push away the person she had only a few hours before been deeply admiring. She was naturally of a happy, lively, peaceful mood, but from constant failures and bad luck, she had come to want so deeply for all to live in peace and joy, and not dare to break that peace. That the smallest problem or tiny disaster drove her almost to madness. She would pass in a second from the brightest hopes and dreams to cursing her life, screaming, and hitting her head against the wall. Amalia Ivanovna, who suddenly gained huge importance in Katrina Ivanovna's eyes and was treated by her with deep respect, probably because Amalia Ivanovna had thrown herself completely into the work. Wow, what a sky, what a sunlight! Oh, 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 just as my dream weather. Amazing, wonderful. The sky is dull, but there is sunlight, and it is going and fading, going up and down. The sunlight amount. Very interesting. Let's do my work. She had taken on setting the table, providing the cloth, plates, cups, cooking the meals in her kitchen. Katrina Ivanovna had left it all in her hands and gone herself to the cemetery. Everything had been done well. Even the tablecloth was almost full. The plates, knives, forks, and glasses were, of course, of all shapes and styles, borrowed from different renters, but the table was properly set at the set time. Amalia Ivanovna, feeling she had done her work well, had put on a black silk dress and a hat with new black ribbons, meeting the returning group with some pride. This pride, though deserved, annoyed Katrina Ivanovna for some reason, as though the table couldn't have been set except by Amalia Ivanovna. She disliked the hat with new ribbons. Could she be getting arrogant, the stupid general woman, just because she was owner of the house and had agreed as a favor to help the poor renters? As a favor, imagine that. Katrina Ivanovna's father, who had been a colonel and almost a leader of the state, had sometimes had the table set for poor people. And then anyone like Amalia Ivanovna, or rather Ludvigovna, would not have been allowed into the kitchen. Katrina Ivanovna, however, put off showing her feelings for the time being and kept to treating her coldly, though she decided inside that she would certainly have to put Amalia Ivanovna down and put her in her place. For goodness only knew what she was thinking of herself. Katerina Ivanovna was annoyed too by the fact that hardly any of the renters who were invited had come to the funeral, except the Polishman, who had just managed to run into the cemetery. Meanwhile, to the memory dinner, the poorest and least important of them had shown up. Miserable people, many of them not quite sober, the older and more respectful of them all, as if agreeing together, stayed away. Pyotr Petrovich Luzin, for example, who might be called the most respectable of all the renters, did not show up, though Katerina Ivanovna had the night before told everyone, that is, Malia Ivanovna, Polenka, Sonia, and the Polishman, that he was the most generous, noble man with a large amount of property and huge connections, who had been a friend of her first husband and a guest in her father's house, and that he had promised to use all his power to get her a good pension. It must be noted that when Katrina Ivanovna praised Daniel's connection and wealth, it was without any secret motive, purely, purely for the fun of making the praised person seem more important. Probably following Lucian's example, that mean and hateful Lebesnikov had not shown up either. What did he think he was? He was only asked out of kindness and because he was sharing the same room with Pyro Petrovich and was a friend of his, so that it would have been awkward not to invite him. Among those who failed to show up were the polite lady and her old unmarried daughter, who had only been the renters in the house for the last 2 weeks, but had several times complained about the noise and screaming in Katrina Ivanovna's room, especially when Marmeladov had come back drunk. Wait. Let me look at the beauty of weather today. They, especially when Marmeladov had come back drunk. Katrina Ivanovna heard this from Amalia Ivanovna, who, fighting with Katrina Ivanovna and threatening to kick the whole family out of the doors, had yelled at her that they were not worth the foot of the respected renters whom they were distributing, whom they were disturbing. So, Katrina Ivanovna decided now to invite this lady and her daughter, whose foot she was not worth, and who had turned away proudly when she happened to meet them, so that they might know that she was more noble in her thoughts and feelings and held no hatred, and might see that she was not used to her poor way of living. She had planned to make this clear to them at dinner with hints about her late father's tough position, and also at the same time to hint that it was very stupid of them to turn away on meeting her. The fat colonel major, he was really a dismissed officer of low rank, was also missing, but it turned out that he had been not feeling well for the last 2 days. The group consisted of the Polish man, a miserable looking worker with a spotty face and a greasy coat, who had not a word to say himself and smelled horrible, and a deaf and almost blind old man who had once worked in the post office and who had for endless years been taken care of by someone at Amalia Ivanovna's retired worker from the supply department came too. He was drunk, had a loud and very rude laugh, and imagine this, was without a vest. One of the visitors sat right down at the table without even greeting Katerina Ivanovna. Finally, one person having no formal suit showed up in his bathrobe, but this was too much, and the efforts of Amalia Ivanovna and the policeman succeeded in removing him. The policeman brought with him, however, 2 other policemen who did not live at Amalia Ivanovna's and whom no one had seen yet before. All this annoyed Katerina Ivanovna deeply, deeply. For whom had they made all those plans then? To make room for the visitors, the children had not even been given places at the main table. Instead, the 2 little ones were sitting on a bench in the fortress corner with their dinner set on a box, while Polenka, being a big girl, had to look after them, feed them, keep their noses wiped like well behaved children. Katrina Ivanova, in fact, could hardly help meeting her guests with extra pride and looked down on your manners. She stared at some of them with special severity, proudly invited them to take their seats, jumping to the thought that Amalia Ivanovna must be to blame for those who were missing. She began treating her with complete cold carelessness, which Amalia Ivanovna quickly ignored and felt hurt by. Such a beginning was no good sign for the end. All were seated along. Raskolnikov came in almost at the moment they returned from the cemetery. Katrina Ivanovna was deeply happy to see him. First, because he was the one educated visitor, and as everyone knew, wasn't too years to become a professor in the college. And second, because he right away and politely said sorry for having been unable to be at the funeral. She practically jumped up and made him sit on her left hand. Amalia Ivanovna was on her right, in spite of her constant worry that the meals should be passed around correctly and that everyone should try them. In spite of the painful cough, which stopped her every minute and seemed to have grown worse during the last few days, she hurried to pour out in a half whisper to Raskolnikov all her parallel feelings and her fair anger at the failure of dinner, mixing her words with lively, unstoppable laughter at the cost of her visitors, and especially her landlady, Katrina Ivanovna, nodding toward Amalia Ivanovna, whispering, "It's all that foolish bird's fault. You know who am I mean? Her. Her, look at her. She's making big round eyes. She feels that we are talking about her and can't understand. Ah, what an owl! Ha ha! Cough, cough, cough. And what does she put on that headboard? Cough, cough, cough. Have you noticed that she wants everyone to think she's being nice to me and doing me a huge favor by being here? I asked her, like a sensible woman, to invite people, especially those who knew my late husband. And look at the group of fools she has brought, the dirty street sweepers. Look at the one with the spotty face, and those miserable Polish women. Cough, cough, cough. Not one of them has ever stepped foot in here. I've never set eyes on them. What have they come here for? I ask you. There they sit in a row. Hey, sir, shouting suddenly at one of the Polishmen. Have you tried the pancakes? Take some more. Have some beer. Don't you have some vodka? Whispering back to Raskolnikov. Look, he's jumped up and is boiling. They must be completely starving, poor things. Never mind, let them eat. They don't make noise anyway. Though I'm really afraid for our lady's silver spoons. Amalia Ivanovna calling out suddenly, almost loud. If your spoons happen to be stolen, I won't be responsible. I warn you. Turning to Raskolnikov and nodding forward toward Amalia Ivanovna. She didn't understand. She didn't understand again. Look how she sits with her mouth open. An owl, a real owl, an owl in her ribbons. Narrator. Here her laugh turned again to an unbearable fit of coughing that lasted 5 minutes. Drops of sweat stood up on her forehead, and her handkerchief was stained with blood. She showed Raskolnikov the blood in silence. And as soon as she could get rid of her breath, began whispering to him again with deep energy and a bright red color on her cheeks. Katerina Ivanovna whispering eagerly. You know, I gave her the most careful instruction, so to speak, for inviting that lady and her daughter. You understand of whom I am speaking? It needed the greatest care, the best manners, but she has managed things so that fool, that arrogant woman, that nobody from out of town, simply because she is the widow of a law officer and has come to try and get a pension, wear out her clothes in the government offices, which at 50 she paints her face. Everybody knows it. A creature like that did not think fit to come, and has not even answered the invitation, which basic good manners are required. I can't understand why Pyro Petrovich will not come, has not come. But where's Sonia? Where has she gone? Ah, there she is at last. What's it, Sonia? Where have you been? It's strange that even at your father's funeral you should be so late. Wouldn't Romanovich make room for her beside you? That's your place, Sonia. Take what you like. Have some of the cold meat with jelly. That's the best. They'll bring the pancakes in a second. Have they given the children some? Olenka, have you got everything? Cough. That's all be right. Be a good girl, Lita. And Kolya, don't move your feet. Sit like a little gentleman. What are you saying, Sonia? Later, Sonia hurried to give her Pyro Petrovich's excuses, trying to speak loud enough for everyone to hear and carefully choosing the most polite words. Which words which she said came from Pyro Petrovich. Sonia, speaking loudly and politely to the room. Pyro Petrovich told me to say that as soon as he possibly can, he will come right away to talk about business along with you and to consider what can be done to help you. Later, Sonia knew that this would comfort Katerina Ivanovna, flatter her, and make her proud. She sat down beside Raskolnikov. She gave him a hurried bow, looking curiously at him, but for the rest of the time, she seemed to avoid looking at him or speaking to him. She seemed lost in thought. Though she kept looking at Katerina Ivanovna, trying to please her, neither she nor Katerina Ivanovna had been able to get black funeral clothes. Sonia was wearing dark brown, and Katerina had on her only dress, a dark striped cordon noir. The message from Pyro Petrovich worked very well. Listening to Sonia with proud behavior, Katerina Ivanovna asked with equal pride how Luzin was, then at once whispered, almost aloud, to Raskolnikov that it certainly would have been strange for a man of Luzin's high place to find himself in such strange group of people in spite of his love for her family and his old friendship with her father. Katrina, speaking almost aloud to Raskolnikov. That's why I'm thankful to you, Lord Romanovich, that you have not looked down on my invitation, even in such poor surroundings, but I'm sure that it was only your special love for my poor husband that has made you keep your promise. Rachel. Then once more, with pride and dignity, she looked over her visitors and suddenly asked aloud across the table of the deaf man. Katrina, shouting across the table, wouldn't you have some more meat? And have you been given some wine? Rachel. The old man made no answer and for a long time could not understand what he was asked. Though his neighbors had fun poking and shaking him, he simply stared around him with his mouth open, which only made everyone laugh more. Katrina, turning back to Raskolnikov, what a fool! Look! Why has he brought? But as to Luzin, I always had a faith in him. turning sharply and shouting at Amalia. And, of course, he's not like you dressed up trash, whom my father would not have taken as cooks into his kitchen, and my late husband would have done them an honor. He had invited them in the goodness of his heart. Commissariat clerk, gulping down his 12th glass of vodka and yelling. Yes, he was fond of drink. He was fond of it. He did drink. Katrina, attacking him right away. My late husband certainly had a weakness, and everyone knows it. But he was a kind and honest man who loved and respected his family. The worst of it was his good heart made him trust all sorts of bad people, and he drank with men who were not worth the bottom of his shoe. Would you believe it, Romanovich? They found a gingerbread toy in his pocket. He was completely drunk, but he did not forget the children. Commissariat clerk, shut and loud. A toy? Did you say a toy? Narrator. Katrina Ivanovna did not care to answer. She sighed, lost in thought. Katrina, sighing and Raskolnikov. No doubt you think, like everyone, that I was too harsh with him. But that's not so. That's not so. He respected me. He respected me very much. He was a kind-hearted man, and how sorry I was for him sometimes. He would sit in a corner and look at me, and I used to feel so sorry for him. I used to want to be kind to him, and then would think to myself, be kind to him, and he will drink again. It was only by being harsh that you could keep him under control. Commissariat clerk, swelling another glass of vodka and laughing loud. Yes, he used to get his hair pulled pretty often. Katrina, snapping at him fiercely. Some fools will be better off with a good beating, as well as having their hair pulled. I'm not talking about my late husband now. Narrator, the red color on her cheeks grew brighter and brighter. Her chest moved up and down fast. In another minute, she would have been ready to start a fight. Many of the visitors were laughing secretly, gladly enjoying it. They began poking and supplying Clark and whispering something to him, trying to push him to say more. Commissariat clerk drunkenly challenged. Allow me to ask what you are hitting at. That is to say, whose? About whom did you say just now? But I don't care, that's silly. Widow, I forgive you. Skip it. He takes another drink of vodka. Narrator. Raskolnikov sat in silence, listening with strong dislike. He only ate to be polite, just tasting the food that Katrina was constantly placing on his plate to avoid hurting her feelings. He watched Sonia closely. Sonia became more and more worried and upset. She too saw that the dinner could not end peacefully, and so with fear, Katrina's growing anger. She knew that Sonia, was the main reason of the polite lady's rude refusal of Katrina Ivanovna's invitation. She had heard from Amalia that the mother was deeply offended by the invitation and had asked the question, how could she let her daughter sit down beside that very young woman? Sonia had a feeling that Katrina had already heard this, and an insult to Sonia meant more to Katrina than an insult to herself, her children, or her father. Sonia knew that Katrina would not be satisfied now until she had shown those trashy women that they were both horrible. To make matters worse, someone passed Sonia. From the other end of the table, a plate with two hearts pierced with an arrow cut out of black bread. Katrina turned bright red and at once spoke loudly across the table. Katrina, shouting across the table. The man who sent this is a drunken fool. Narrator, Amalia saw something that come. Amalia tried to speak proudly. Carl from the chemist shop was driving one night in a cab, and the cabman wanted him to kill, and Carl was very much begged him. Carl very much begged him, and Carl very much begged him not to kill, and cried and held his hands, and frightened, and from fear pierced his heart. Narrator. Though Katrina smiled, she pointed out at once that Amalia should not tell stories in Russian. The landlady was even more offended and snapped back. Amalia, my father from Berlin was a very important man, and always walked with his hands in pockets. Narrator. Katrina could not stop herself and laughed so much that Amalia lost her patience and could barely control her anger. Katrina, whispering to Raskolnikov, laughing. Listen to the owl. She meant to say he kept his hands in his own pocket, but she said he put his hands in other people's pockets. Cough. And have you noticed, Roman Romanovich, that all these foreign people here, the Germans especially, are all more stupid than us. Can you imagine any of us telling how Carl from the chemist pierced his heart from fear, and that the idiot, instead of pushing the cabman, held his hands and cried and begged very much. Ah, what a fool! And she thinks it's very sad and sweet and doesn't guess how stupid he is. She is, to my mind, the drunken supply worker. It's a great deal smart. At least one can see that he has ruined his brain with drink. But these foreigners are always so well behaved and serious. Look how she sits staring. She's angry. Cough. Coughing goes here. Right. Getting back to her good mood, Katrina began at once telling Raskolnikov that when she got her pension, she planned to open a school for the daughters of gentlemen in her hometown. This was the first time she had spoken to him about the plan. She went into the most exciting details. It suddenly turned out that Katrina had in her hands the very award paper of which Marmeladov had spoken to Raskolnikov in the bar. When he told him that Katrina Ivanovna, his wife, had danced the scarf dance before the leader and, and other important people on leaving school, this award paper was clearly meant now to prove Katrina Ivanovna's right to open a school. But she had brought it mainly to crush those two arrogant women if they come to the dinner, and to prove without a doubt that Katrina was of the most noble family. A colonel's daughter was far better than certain women who have been so popular lately. The award paper immediately passed into the hands of drunk guests, and Katrina Ivanovna did not try to take it back, for it actually contained the printed words stating that her father was an officer of high rank, so that she really was almost the daughter of a colonel. Warming up, Katrina kept talking about the peaceful and happy life They would lead in her home camp about the school teachers whom she would hire to give lessons in her school. One a very respected old Frenchman, a Mr. Mengat, who had taught Katrina herself in the old days and was still living there, and would no doubt teach in her school for low pay. Next, she spoke of Sonia, who would go with her and help in her all her plans. At this, someone at the far end of the table gave a sudden loud laugh. Though Katrina tried to act as if she were proudly unaware of it, she raised her voice and began at once speaking with strong belief in Sonia's clear ability to help. Katrina, speaking loudly and tapping Sonia's cheek. She has true gentleness, patience, love, generosity, and a good education. Narrator. She kissed Sonia warmly twice. Sonia turned bright red, and Katrina suddenly burst into tears. Immediately making an excuse, Katrina cried, I'm just nervous and silly. I'm too upset. It's time to finish, and as the dinner is over, it is time to head around the tea. At the moment, Amalia Ivanovna, deeply hurt at taking no part in the conversation and not being listened to, made one last try. With secret fear, wow! Look at the light change. With secret fear, she risked a very deep and heavy comment. Amalia in, says, in the future school, you will have to pay close attention to the laundry. There must be a good woman to look after the clothes. Second, the young ladies must not read love books at night. Narrator. Katrina, who was suddenly upset and very tired, as well as completely sick of the dinner, at once cut Amalia short. Katrina, you know nothing about it and are talking nonsense. It is the work of the laundry workshop and not the boss of a high class school to look after the clothes. And as for book reading, that is simply rude of you to bring up, and I ask you to be silent. Amalia, firing up angrily. I only meant you good. I meant you're very good. And it is long since you have paid your money for the rooms. Katrina, cutting her down instantly. It is a lie to say you wish me good. Just yesterday, when my dead husband was lying on the table, you bothered me about the rent money. Amalia, replying sharply. I invited those fine ladies, but those ladies have not come because those ladies are real ladies, cannot come to a woman who is not a lady. Katrina, you are a messy, dirty woman, so you cannot judge what makes someone a real lady. Amalia, yelling and waving her hands. My father from Berlin was a very, very important man. He walked with both hands in pockets and always used to say, poof. Right. She jumped up from the table to act like her father, sticking her hands in her pockets, puffing out her cheeks, and making strange sounds like poof, poof. Amid loud laughter from all the waiters, who, on purpose, cheered Amalia Ivanovna on, hoping for a fight. But this was too much for Katrina, and she declared it was, so that all could hear. Katrina shouting to the room, you probably never had a father at all. You are simply a drunken foreign woman. And you were certainly once a kitchen worker, and probably something worse. Amalia turned as red as a lobster and screamed back. Amalia, screaming, maybe you never had a father, but I had a father from Berlin. And he wore a long coat and always said, poof, poof, poof. Katrina, speaking with her utter disgust. Everyone knows what my family was. On that very paper is printed that my father was a high officer. While your father, If you really had one, it was probably some milkman, but you probably never had a father at all. Since no one even knows if your name is Amalia or Amalia, since probably no one knows, but you probably never had a father at all. Since no one knows if your name is Amalia Ivanona or Amalia Ludwigona. Amalia, lashed to fury, hitting the table with her fist and shrieking. I am Amalia Ivanona, not Ludwigona. My father was named John, and he was a city leader, and your father was never a city leader. Katrina, rising from a chair, pale with her chest heaving, speaking in a stern voice. If you dare for 1 second to place your miserable, trashy father on the same level as my papa, I will tear that head off your head and step all over it. Amalia ran around the room, shouting at the top of her voice. Amalia shouted loudly, I am the owner of the house. You will leave this room this very minute. Then she rushed for some reason to grab the silver spoons from the table. There was a great shout and loud noise. The children began crying. Sonia ran to hold Katrina back. But when Amalia yelled something himself, Sonia's shameful work card about Sonia's shameful work, Katrina pushed Sonia away and rushed at the landlady to carry out her threat. At that second, the door opened and Lozin appeared at the entrance. He stood looking at the group with severe and watchful eyes. Katrina rushed to him. With due respect, politely, gentlemen, this here we end this chapter with full politeness. Like peace, peace.